Hey guys, hope you're doing all good today, and here we are with a fantastic showdown between two legendary warriors, ALDB, also known as Grombrindle, I believe, up against Butcherbird 9, and we have a rather interesting Dowie force to say the least, but one I don't actually hate. So off the straight bat, it looks like an absolute meme build. We have a full Slayer force. We have some giant Slayers on the flanks, basic Slayers dotted through the middle, though it looks like they are going to be chevroned up quite nicely. Dragonback Slayers supporting as well, the Regiment of Renown, who slow down the enemy, and more giant Slayers over on this far side. Of course, leading the force, we have our two Slayer heroes, or one hero, one lord. We have the mighty and legendary Gotrek, who's going to be bringing a ton of his items. We've got the Rune Axe of Gotrek, Gotrek's Doom, of course, Deadly Onslaught, Foe Seeker, and Deathblow. And he's going to be able to heal up the mighty Ungrim, who of course is the king of all the Slayers. Well, king of Krakadrin and therefore kind of the king of Slayers. Comes with Axe of Dargo as well as Red Ruin, Deadly Onslaught, Foe Seeker and Deathblow. So bringing all the goodies today in an awesome front battle line. Now this may seem like a complete meme, and it is, but at the same time, up against Bretonnia, I actually don't think it's too terrible, as long as your opponent doesn't go mass archers, and thankfully, it looks like the Bretonians have not gone for those pesky peasants, so we have to have a look what else they've brought. In the front line, we have some peasant mobs, cheap, cheerful, and they're just happy to be out in the countryside. Looks like we have 3 or 4 units of those bad boys. Or 5 in fact, so 5 units of peasants dotted all the way along, and they're supporting a couple of units of foot squires. Now, foot squires is one of those units that in the past I have kind of been rather rude to and insulted a little bit. I don't think they're even particularly good up against the dwarves, even despite the fact they are armor piercing and anti-infantry, but saturated on top of some peasant mobs, perhaps they would normally be able to carve through dwarf warriors and longbeards. It'll be interesting to see how these brave soldiers do up against the mighty Slayer onslaught. We do have triple field trebuchets, and due to this map having this lovely hill in the middle, they'd be very good at counter-skirmishing enemy artillery by looping shots up and over, hitting cannons who would really struggle to shoot here, but it looks like Grombrindle hasn't fallen for that ploy. In the back here, we do have the defenders of Fleur de Lis, the Regiment of Renowned Knights Errant, and yeah, they're pretty good all round. Anti-infantry frenzy. If they do some good cycle charging, should be relatively okay up against the Slayers. Over on the right-hand side, hidden in the trees, we have some Question Knights, once again, anti-infantry armor piercing, and some Royal Hippogriff Knights up in the skies. Always awesome to see these bad boys in action. They're incredibly expensive, but pack a huge punch. They were broken a little while ago, but I think have been fixed in kind of recent patches, so their attack animations aren't quite so janky. More Knights Errant over on this flank, and the mighty King Leoncoeur up in the skies on his mighty Beaky here. And he is going to be coming in, of course, with the Sword of Corone, as well as the Lion Shield, 2 very useful abilities, as well as Stand Your Ground, and of course he has the Ladies Champion regeneration, all that good stuff. And we have a Damsel of Life coming in with Shield of Thorns and Earthblood. So without further ado, let's get this battle underway, and just the horde of ginger dwarves charging at you across the field must be a terrifying sight. Trebuchets have opened up, targeting down Giant Slayers is a really good choice here. Giant Slayers all round are fantastic up against Bretonnia now. I mean, Slayers in general will be able to chew through pretty much all Bretonnian infantry. They're also fantastic up against all the large creatures, such as Beaky up in the sky with King Leon here, as well as against cavalry. So honestly, a full Slayer build, maybe not the worst idea in the world. They're also rather quick, and you can see a lovely change of formation, trying to allow the Slayers to push through. You can see they're manually being clicked here, dragged through to start shutting down at those field trebuchets. As for the front line, the peasants not having too good of a day. Of course, they'll be able to drag down 1 or 2 Slayers perhaps, but for the most part, the foot squires are going to be the only ones holding their ground, with the Slayers with their whirling axes carving their way through the formation so far. Over on the far side, though, there is a nice flank attack by the Knights Errant to come crashing out of the trees downhill before peeling away once more, trying to do a little bit of hit and run, which is the way Bretonnia have a chance in this game. But Slayers have bustled their way through the front line, starting to shut down the field trebuchets very quickly. Slayers cheering as they do charge forwards, axes raised, bloody faces covered in the guts of fellow peasants as the field trebuchetmen do lock on in despair. Over on the high ground here, there's some lovely isolation here by the Bretonnian player, whacking down at this unit of giant Slayers, finishing them off with just overwhelming firepower before trying to hop onto more units. Perhaps isolating the ones who have pushed through on top of the trebuchets is the way to go, but the Bretonnian firepower has been shut down at this point. The peasants are running for the hills. Here we do have the foot squires desperately trying to be an anvil to help the defenders as well as these Knights Errant really pay for themselves. They are sticking in combat a tiny bit too long. Although they are now peeling back, so being overall some relatively decent cycle charging in. Giant Slayers, though, do have relatively decent mass now and can pin in troops, and the Slayers, who did initially put pressure on the enemy back line, are coming with some rear attacks on the foot squires to really try to break them up. We do have 2 more units, however, trying to rush down the hill to the aid of this remaining field trebuchet, but the Dwarves actually having a bit of a mobility advantage, at least in the foot game, with all these naked lunatics. Another unit of Slayers has been isolated. This is a fantastic way for the Bretonnians to get into the game. Question Knights, Royal Hippogriff Knights, as well as the King, just bouncing around, isolating units of Slayers and finishing them off where possible. Some loyal peasant mobs as well coming to their aid. And it looks like a lot of the Bretonnians are starting to rally in the distance as well. This field trebuchet only up to 10 kills. It is kind of hard to get value up against the Slayers, as they are in a relatively spread out formation. Although for the most part now, they have kind of focused their forces into a big old moving death blob, which is a good thing to do with Slayers. You're on breakable, doesn't really matter if cavalry charge you, you will slowly drag them down. And here we have Ungrim slaying some manlins, hitting them so hard they actually fly up and over his head. A lot of the foot squads are now starting to break and run for the hills, or being shattered, as we can see in the central portion. Looks like Grombrindle did realise what was happening to his troops. As you can see, this unit of Slayers was finished off, so now he's going to be trying to work as a big fat wrecking ball. There are some Giant Slayers who are kind of on their own up here, trying to shut down the field trebuchet. Knights want to wheel around and hunt these guys down, while simply sacrificing peasant mobs into the central portion here to try to slow down the enemy where possible. Balance power is currently dead even, but it's going to be pretty hard for the Bretonnians just from the builds at this point. Giant Slayers are getting a few lances in the back here by the defenders, and in comes the King for a huge charge straight into the big old pocket of Slayers. Hippogriff Knights coming in as well. We are going to be getting a fat stand your ground, as well as Sword of Corone and Shield of Thorns going down as the ultimate charge to try and whittle down these Dwarf Warriors is underway. While the Shield of Thorns is active, not too bad idea to leave the Knights in to try and get some decent damage. It looks like a few of them are trying to get back up into the skies to do some more cycle charging. Looks like that charge didn't go too well for the King. Despite the Lion's Shield, Stand Your Ground, as well as Shield of Thorns, he just gets absolutely slaughtered by Ungrim and Gotrek and the huge wave of Slayers here. Knights as well as the Royal Hippogriff Knights do come charging once more, and the Slayers are pretty beat up at this point. A lot of their units are relatively low health, but the heroes are incredibly healthy at this point. If we look at the balance of power, despite the fact the Dwarves are outnumbered at this point by elite knights and so forth, looks like army losses will kick in with the loss of their lord, and a Pyrrhic victory for the almighty full Slayer build. Very well played there to ALDB, who I'm 99% sure is Grombrindle. He sent in the replay, so unless it's a friend of his, it is him himself. But also well played to Butcherbird. I've actually seen him a few times on ladder and a few replays people have sent to me. Always puts on a good show, so massive shout out to him as well. Doing the best he could up against a rather surprising build. And guys, hope you did enjoy. If you did, feel free to give the video a big old thumbs up and subscribe for more Total War Warhammer content. Do put out content every single day. And if you want to support the channel, you can become a member here on the channel. If you're subscribed, there should be a little blue join button you can press and it'll explain more there. Or you can support me over on Patreon. There's a link down below in the description. But anyway, for the builds, the mighty Ungrim, basically untouched by the end, still managed to get 1,000 damage value. He's one of the cheaper Dowie Lords himself, and all round I think he's still slightly underrated, although people do tend to pick him a little bit more now. I just think the fact that Grombrindle is unbreakable does also take away Ungrim's niche just a tiny bit. Gotrek as well, very healthy in the end game, despite the fact the rest of the Dwarf build was pretty spent at this point. Got some decent value, and as you can see across the board, the Slayers doing very well for themselves, in particular the Giant Slayers. I can't sing enough praise on these guys at the moment. They are absolutely fantastic alongside the Dragonback Slayers. Also a good counter to Chariots, by the way, in case any Dwarf players were wondering. Much better than Slayers, who tend to get pushed over for the most part. But good use as well of changing the formation, pushing through the gaps in the Bretonnian infantry and shutting down the trebuchets. And as I said before, they're going to beat pretty much any infantry the Bretonnians can bring. They're good against all the cavalry. They're good against chasing down artillery pieces. They can even chase down peasant bowmen relatively okay. But if Butcherbird had gone for the typical 5 peasant archers, which I don't play this matchup too often because it is generally considered to be quite dwarf favoured. I don't know how often peasant archers are picked. They are very good at destroying artillery crews. So if he had brought, 3 or 4 peasant archers perhaps and just cut the trebuchets, or cut 2 trebuchets, added in some peasant bowmen, it could have been a very, very different display, with the peasant archers whittling down the slayers from long range. Now let's take a look at how the Bretonnian forces did though. The field trebuchets really struggled to get their value. As we said during the battle, the spread out formation of the Dowie is quite hard for them to kind of gain any route, but I do like the pick, especially on the map. I think it was actually quite a nice sly pick to try and outtrade Dwarven artillery, but Krakadrin were not falling for that rubbish. Apart from that, Royal Hippogriff Knights got some decent damage value, as did the Queston Knights. The Knights Errant struggled a little bit more, but good isolation using the elite units as well as the King, who didn't of course pay for himself at the moment, but managed to whittle down the Dwarf forces, slay a couple of giant slayers, and finish off some slayers as well. The foot squads didn't do too terrible, especially saturated on top of the peasant mobs, who even managed to get some kills, so not the worst day for them in the office. Anyway guys, until next time, peace, and as always, stay awesome.